It's good to see so many friends and new people coming to this yet to be another very successful presentation given by our good friend, Professor Chris Tang, flying all the way from Los Angeles, distinguished university professor at the UCLA Anderson School of Business. Let me give a very short introduction because we are already 5 minutes behind. So I said Professor Tang is a university distinguished professor, also Edward Carter Chair in Business Administration, Senior Associate Dean of Global Initiatives at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. He's also a lifetime fellow of 3 major academic societies in his profession, which is supply chains, including INFORMS, MSOM, and POMS. He's a thought leader in global supply chain management, has consulted many global companies, including Amgen, Amazon, HP, IBM. I'm not going to list the whole list. He has taught at Stanford, UC Berkeley, HK UST, NUS, MIT. How come I didn't see Hong Kong U? So this is something that you need to add to your long bio in the near future. Our Vice President Max Shang is here, and I'm sure he's going to facilitate that to happen. Chris has published 7 books, 40 book chapters, 200 research articles in global supply chains. He also published over 100 articles in mass media outlets, including Wall Street Journal's, Financial Times, South China Morning Post, China Daily. I personally enjoy reading a lot of your non-academic stuff because I don't really understand your academic stuff. But the non-academic part is really something that touched me as a person who also spent a long time in the US. Chris was born in China, grew up in Hong Kong, had been a professor in the US for over 4 decades. Something that he has written a lot in the last few years is some essentially common sense about the China and US relationship. It took quite a lot of bravery, I would say, to write for both New York Times and China Daily at the same time. And you can imagine, every time you write something for one side, you will be attacked by the other side. But anyhow, without further ado, I'm going to let Chris to take over the stage to talk about managing supply chains in the ESG era. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Hayward, for the kind introduction. Well, this is a privilege for me to speak for the AGI and also in this building. So Brian was speaking earlier and so follow his footsteps to speak at this event. And also, this is the first time I entered this building. This building is not allowed for other people, so it's a privilege even to be here today. Now, and also we're really among friends, and Max is really with good friends for a long time, and will co-author and also will co-supervise some of his students as well, and many long-term friends here. So I really want to thank you for attending this talk today. Now, before I start talking, I want to have a declaration. I am not a subject expert in this field. It is very new. The whole world is trying to explore how ESG is evolving and how the regulations changing and what companies need to address some of the issues, and as well as how regulations and also companies need to cope with the changing landscape. So I hope that this presentation is more like as a conversation and maybe exchange ideas among really interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary experts. Here, you, and as such, I can learn from you, and hopefully that you find that some of the thoughts that I share with you may be of interest to you as well. So this is a declaration, because right now I think there's no experts in ESG, because it's changing worldwide, right? Even the government does not know. All right, so then with that said, so I'm going to share with you the first one. Look at the Levi's jeans, look at the soap and the coffee. What do they have in common? Right? It seems that they have nothing in common. But actually, if you look at the product itself, they don't have anything in common. But if you look at in terms of the supply chain process, there's something in common. So, for example, there are a lot of environmental issues, like palm, your soap, your cosmetics use a lot of palm oil. So in Indonesia, they had to burn down the forest so they can change the palm tree. But they use slash and burn techniques. That's why it creates a lot of environmental issues. That's why in Singapore, they complain about the air pollution from Indonesia every year because of this. So now the question, how can we stop this kind of illegal slash and burn techniques such that you can protect the environment as well as the habitats of some of the endangered species. So we need to do that. Levi's jeans. The jeans actually takes hundreds, if not thousands, gallons of water to produce one pair of jeans. It's one of the most environment and friendly products. It turned out most consumers did not know. Actually, the jeans were designed not to be washed. You can wear many, many times without washing, but people don't know that, right? So that is another thing that the public also need to be educated as well. So on top of that, there's also social issues. In terms of in many your electronic waste and also some of the minerals, a lot of time they were actually extracted by children in developing countries. A lot of electronic waste is also processed by children as well. And also during COVID, a lot of retailers, they canceled the orders. Once they cancel the orders, some of them may pay the contract manufacturers, some of them don't. So if they don't, then they don't pay the workers. So therefore, they call this wage theft by some of the brands. So the lists of the brands like Adidas, they don't pay. Then the question, that is also not being responsible. Then how do you get to this point? Right? Well, then you look at the consumers, by and large, this is the survey done by Forbes last year, and they said that, well, a lot of consumers, they just don't know how to cope and how to deal with all these environmental issues, because sometimes they don't care. It's not my problem because it's not in the US or in Europe, and or outside of mine because I don't know, because I plead ignorance, because I don't have information from the companies. They don't declare, are they clean, are they not clean? And the last one is that, well, I presume the firms will do the right thing. This is because, the market will take care of itself. So in that case, if the firms are not friendly, then the market will punish them. But is it true? So this leads to the origin of Friedman's belief in terms of shareholder value. They say, well, assuming the market is perfect, it's pure efficient, so therefore there is an invisible hand. If you are not being environmental friendly, not being socially responsible, the market will correct itself so that you'll be penalized. Well, that was a good idea, but then the question, the execution, it shows a difference. We have the Volkswagen diesel scandal in Europe. We have the collapse of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh in 2013. Over 1,000 people were killed. Unfortunately, the building that collapsed, they were the contract manufacturers of Li & Fung. So that's why it created a lot of challenges afterwards. So that is one of the triggers of the challenge Li & Fung faced. And the last one, in terms of wage theft, was triggered during the COVID issues. Now, then that was in the 1970s. Then in the 80s, there's a Freeman. This is a different, it's Freeman from Berkeley. Then they said, well, maybe we should expand the scope of shareholder to stakeholders. That means we need to include the value of employees, consumers, the public, your products. How is the externality affect the environments and other things? We should take that into consideration. That's a good idea. That is how it pivots, evolved into corporate social responsibility, CSR. But that, by and large, was not successful. Why? The main reason is that it's not really well defined, and a lot of time it's not part of the business model. Unlike Margie's the business model, and then she incorporated ESG in her business model. But most companies, they treat it as separate. It's just outside the scope. It's just filing reports. So they have a division. So therefore, they realize that this is also not very successful. That's why there's a change. The change is now, starting in 2005, the United Nations was actually trying to encourage companies to disclose their deeds Are they doing good in the environment, in the social issues, in the governance issues? So that's why it triggered a new movement. So that is a ESG. Then what is ESG, right? So we heard all about it. So by and large, this is what I'm going to share with you today. So they said, well, I try to look into ESG in the context of supply chain. Now, ESG itself within the firm has been studied to a certain extent. But in terms of along the supply chain, it's still not that easy to do. So later I'll tell you why it's so difficult. Because right now, many companies are struggling with Scope 3 emissions, right? So I'll come back to that. All right, so the beginning, we'll talk about that. So now I'm going to tell you about this is a big movement in the world. And then I talk about in terms of supply chain ESG. It's a paper with Ting Long Dai, and thanks for Hayway for sponsoring that white paper study. And also we talk about just a little research study. I'm working with CU HK. So although that I'm most of the time in the States, but actually my mind is still in Hong Kong and China. All right, so thank you. So they conclude. All right, so why ESG now? Why not before? Well, the things are changing. One is from the perspective from shareholder to stakeholder, and also CSR to ESG, because now we make it measurable. Before it's not measurable. They want to because you only get what you measure. If you're not measured, you cannot gauge whether the company is doing the right thing or not. Then also the younger generation is also changing in terms of they care about the climate, justice and fairness. And then the younger people now, because of the new investment information system, a young person can buy over 1,000 of one share. So that means that even you don't have the money, you can be a shareholder. You could have a voice. So now companies worry about that. Now, this is big. In terms of ESG, overwhelming. There are basically 79 measures. No company can handle that. It's overwhelming. So for the environmental pillar, social pillar, and governance pillar, so just name a few. In terms of climate change, waste and pollution, that could be water, could be air, could be packaging, how you package, and also in terms of social pillar, how you manage the labor, the health and safety environments, and also in terms of the product liabilities, right? And then in terms of governance, now in the US, we worry about diversity in terms of percentage female on the board, and also do you have check and balance in terms of how your investment decisions. That is a big debate now with the collapse of the SVB bank, right, in the US. All right, so this is measures, but that is in a flux. People recognize it's too overwhelming. They need to simplify the measures because others not possible. But this is natural because initially the E pillar is measured by different NGOs. S is another NGOs and G is NGO. But eventually it will be evolved into a more synthesized into more manageable measures. But we're not there yet. Next one, and this one give you an example. This is MSCI is the biggest rating agencies for Samsung. So this one show you that is the current practice. They exceeded the Paris Accord. So in the case, they will generate around 2.4 degrees, which is they're actually supposed to be reduced by 1.5 degrees. So they're not there yet. So this try to alert the investors that this company need to change. If they don't change, they are harming the environment as well. So at least you know. So it's such that the investor can make informed investment decisions. That was the idea. Then the other measures in terms of ESG, they're from AAA to CCC. So Samsung is A. All right. So, but this is huge. This is so big. It is amazing. Right now, it's around $35 trillion for the asset under management. It's going to grow to be $53 trillion. Now, one company, this is BlackRock. The BlackRock is the biggest asset management fund. The chairman is our alum, Larry Fink. So basically, they manage $10 trillion of investment fund, including pension in terms of all this. Now, I checked Hong Kong, the MPF fund. They do invest in the ESG fund, but I couldn't get the percentage of the fund invested in ESG. But it is part of the your MPF fund, right? So this is very big. So this is a golden opportunity for business, for investors, and also for consulting firms. So PwC is going to invest, I think, a couple $1 billion to hire 100,000 consultants to help company how to develop measurements, how to filing the disclose this kind of information. So right now, I think in business school, they feel that this is the biggest thing for the next 2 decades. All right, so whenever it's so big, many fools rush in, all right? So we have a lot of rating agencies. The first one is, the oldest one is MSCI. It's been around for 40 years. Sustainalytics is purchased by Morningstar, which is a rating agency measuring stocks. Bloomberg, which you know. Refinitiv is owned by the London Stock Exchange. Then the others you know. And also you need someone to analyze all the data. They use AI now. Maybe next will be GPT. And then there are also a lot of data collection agencies. So that is also create a lot of opportunities for people to do data analytics because the data is there. So in that case, we should not just let the finance people to analyze it, because we could analyze it from a supply chain perspective, we can analyze it from the governance perspective, also in terms of social perspective, right? So there are opportunities. All right, so the rating agencies is very complicated. They have started raw data. They collect data from everywhere, including NGO, internal reports, disclosure, government, academics, data, and then they try to starting from bottom up. They start from bottom and then they analyze different measures and then finally come up with the rating. So this, but different rating agencies, they have different weights for different things, all right? So it's not perfect, but they at least they disclose in terms of how they go about doing that, all right? Now, but there are problems. If you look at different rating agencies, they're all over the map. So for example, Intel, the red one is KLD, is rated very high, but then on the other hand, some of the other rating agencies are very low. Then why is there such inconsistency? The main reason is that they collect different subsets of data, point number one. Second, they assign different weights for different measurements. So as a result of this, so in the case, this is a paper was conducted at MIT and also Zurich. And then they said that this is now is an idea they need to disclose in terms of what kind of measurements all these rating agencies need to agree upon what set of measurement they use. And also you can use different weights, which is fine. But the measurements should be standardized. We are not there yet. But at least it's good for the public to know there is in the work. All right, so, but this is not without controversies. I live in the States, so I can show you the blue state and the red state. The blue state, I'm in California, so everyone supporting the governance integration, so my retirement fund is relying on that. In Florida, it's banned. In Washington, D.C., it's split. So now it's to be determined, right? So in that case, that is a big different disputes, disagreement. But eventually, the dust will settle. So some conservatives, they say they want to ban all this because they think it's a waste of time. But for the liberal like myself, I said, look, we are not there yet. If we stop it now, we'll never get there. So we want companies to be responsible. If this is the wrong measure, let's talk about what is the right measure. But if we don't have that process in terms of fairness, equity, climate issues, governance issues, we don't have. So I said that it's maybe too early to give it up. And also, financial measures, accounting measures, did not sort out all the measures overnight. It took them many years to evolve. So I said, we are just starting. Then let's give this baby a chance, right? So that's why there are two camps. One camp is a waste of time. The other camp I'm in is that let's give it a chance. We're not there yet, right? Okay, so I have done some work, and including the work that Hayway sponsored. So I'm going to talk about supply chain issues with Ting Long. So this one is, I want to show you Amazon. Amazon is the favorite child in the ESG fund. Many investment funds, they like Amazon because, well, it's e-commerce, so well, maybe it's cleaner and all this. Then the question, is it true? So they have very good rating. AAA is highest, but A is very good. So here, the ESG, the measurement is they weighted around 30% on the environmental, all right? So now let us dig deeper, all right? If you dig deeper, the emission score is weighted 12.7%, is A+, very good. Now, but there's a problem. Amazon's revenue is bigger than Walmart. But what they claim is that the shipping emissions is only 1/7 of Walmart. Well, why? Because they only count the one that they own, in terms of the own product. They do not count for the third-party sellers. That is a disagreement. If you count for those, maybe the emissions are much bigger. So that is a problem, right? So therefore, we need to include the emissions generated by the third-party sellers, by the suppliers, right? So what is Scope 3? Let me explain. So in the ESG movements, in the emissions, Scope 1 is the emissions generated by your facilities, your in-house. Scope 2 is the emissions that you purchase the energy, how they generate the energy. Scope 3 is external, could be your upstream supply chains, including logistics, production, whatnot, and then downstream would be transportation and whatnot, right? Now, as it turned out, Scope 3 is extremely difficult to measure because most companies, they don't even know the supply chain structure. Around 20% of firms by McKinsey is they have the visibility up to tier 2, tier 1, tier 2. Beyond that, they do not know. That means they only observe the first layer. Of course, they had to pay the bill. But then tier 2, only 20%. And the further upstream, they actually don't even know who they are. Then the question, how do you measure? You don't even know who they are. There are approximations. I'll come back to that. Then only 9% will disclose. And also in terms of Microsoft, I met this VP. They also produce servers and service computings and also other hardware devices like the Echo, the Alexa. So she told me that they claim that 98% of the emission generated by external, because internal they don't have generate that much emissions. All right. So that means that Scope 3 must be counted. Otherwise, we are missing the elephant. All right. So as it turned out, CDP, I was looking at the report last night. They claim that the supply chain emissions are accounting by close to more than 11 times of Scope 1. So that means that if you don't look into Scope 3, you're missing the boat. But Scope 3 is difficult to measure. But that means there's an opportunity for companies, for academics, for them to actually find out to measure it. That because Scope 3 can be kind of hidden to the public. So as a result, they can actually kind of shifting the emissions from Scope 1 to Scope 3. That means I can show you, oh, my emissions very low. But actually behind the scene is actually, because I outsource everything, then let the emission emitted elsewhere, like China, right? So this chart shows that is for the OECD countries, the emission is very stabilized. But look at the non-OECD, it's growing like crazy, right? So right now would be like, besides China, India is one of the most polluted countries in the world because now more manufacturing activities are taking place in India. So therefore, it's not exactly we are addressing the problem. So therefore, we must try to share what we know. They say that companies need to be accountable for the total emissions. Otherwise, we'll never get there. Yeah? All right, so this is what we are. So let me share with you a small research project I'm working with CUHK with my colleagues. So this one is we just try to understand companies. Right now we examine all the companies. There are two types. One type they disclose, they self-disclose voluntarily about the Scope 1 emissions. They tell you, oh, this is our emissions. Then we claim that is for those who disclose to you, they tend to have a lower Scope 1. But then we suspect that it's also likely that they disclose they're lower, then actually they shift it to the upstream suppliers to Scope 3. That is true. So we want to use data to show that this is our conjecture. All right? So that means that is if if your company try to say, oh, I'm clean, but actually on the surface you're clean, but beneath the surface, actually you shift your emissions to someone else. So make yourself look good, but actually you're actually not doing good. So we want to see if it's true or not. If this is true, that means that we need to ask companies not to disclose as Scope 1. You have to disclose everything. Then we can see the whole elephant. Because right now, we're only seeing a part of the elephant, right? Now, so how do we do that? Well, first, we identify the company that disclose to the public about the Scope 1. So we can find in the CDP reports which firms are disclosed. And then Scope 3, no one has. No one in the world has it. So we have to actually rely on a company, now it's owned by S&P Global, and also they're used by MSCI, and also that now Wharton, the data research service, they also provide this data as well. And BlackRock, a finance accounting professor, use it. So basically, they don't have the exact information is estimated. Then how do they estimate it? That is the world's biggest question. Because if you don't know the supply chain, it's very difficult to check every single possibility. And also the process to check is virtually impossible, right? So in the absence of the data, they use a macroeconomics technology, machineries. That's what they call the, in terms of the input-output matrix. There is a Leontief matrix who won the Nobel Prize. So that means that is by examining your activities based on what type of product you produce. So for example, Tesla. Tesla is classified into two industries. The output is cars as well as batteries. They make two products. Then we look at the revenue, the percentage, how they allocate to this one. Then we look at the output. Then in the US, in terms of the Bureau of the Environmental Analysis, they do disclose for this two industry what is the emission intensity. So we can calculate. That is Scope 1. But then how do you do Scope 3? Scope 3, that's where the input-output matrix comes in. It's in order to generate product based on these two industry, then the government has actually looked at the worldwide data to look at what kind of input from which sector you need to do. Could be steel, could be energy, could be water, could be some other sectors, yeah, metal and all this. Then they use the input-output, but then this is from the input, but that could be from tier 1. But then they repeat the process. Then it's a matrix, a square, and the cube and all this. Then they trace it back. Then eventually they look at the summation of the series. Then it's formed as the total input from all these sectors. Then multiply by the emission intensity for those sectors, sum them up. That would be the Scope 3. It's an estimation. For the non-disclosing firm, they do the same thing, right? Now, this is estimation, but our claim is the following. If we do the estimation for every single firm in the same way, so maybe there's bias. Even the bias will be systemic. So we can do a sensitivity analysis. Because they're all, if it's biased one way, then we actually have to look at the sensitivity analysis. We can actually address that. It's not exact by any means, but no one has it. Then the question, no one has the information right now, that's what we do. All right, so then we have some other data. Altogether, we have over 80,000 firm year observations, and then we have a different industry from food, retail, petroleum, mining, and cover 90 countries. So I'll show you some statistics. In general, I think in terms of emissions per companies, is going down, all right, which is good per firm. And also the number of firms, percentage firm in our data that disclose the emissions, Scope 1. The highest year is 2015. Why 2015? Because that was the year the Paris Accord was signed in December, right? So 190 countries agreed to that. So that was the biggest year. Then kind of fluctuate a little bit, all right? So this one. The second one is show you where the data come from. So these are the firms in different countries, and Hong Kong is middle of the pack. Of course, in terms of Scandinavian countries and Europe, they actually disclose more, which makes sense. Now, China needs to disclose a bit more. So it's okay. Everything is in progress. It takes time because collecting data is also very tedious. So I think that Hong Kong is middle of the road, but I think that we're getting there eventually. All right. So then this is our comparisons. All right. This is a very simple analysis, no complication. This column is the firm that they disclose. This is a column that's for the firm they do not disclose. Each row is based on the variables. The first one is the log of the Scope 1 emissions, and then log the Scope 2, log the Scope 3 upstream, is the supply chain. And then the total emissions, and then ratio. I want to look at the ratio between Scope 3 divided by, that is a relative, right? Relative versus absolute. And then we adjust for many other factors. Size of the company, return on assets, and R&D budget, and whatnot, all right? So we find that actually there is a difference between firms they disclose versus they don't disclose. This is the significance. Then now the question is that with this whole result, it will control for all the other firms' characteristics. For example, where they're located, the headquarters, and also which firm, industry are they in, and also the year. So with R&D budget and everything. So we adjust for that. Then we try to see whether our hypothesis is actually hold or not. Because this one is without adjusting for all these factors. It will do that. So what we do is run a simple regression model, and this is our result. I omit all the other variables. So in that case, you can see the number. So basically, the top is what we call the dependent variables, like the Y. Then the independent variables, I don't highlight one of them, is disclosed. It's a dummy variable, 0 or 1. So basically, it shows that for the firm to disclose, indeed, they declare that actually they're lower Scope 1 emissions. But then you look at Scope 3, actually is higher. So that means that these firms who disclose, they are maybe, they knowingly or unknowingly, they shift some of the emissions to the suppliers, all right? And also this is also true for the ratio, because when S1 and S2 is lower, then S3 is higher, so therefore it's positive, right? So we find that, so that is quite interesting. So we found that the hypothesis 1 is supported. That means the disclosing firm, they have lower Scope 1 emissions. That means they're boastful in terms of about the performance. But on the other hand, if you dig deeper, is actually they have a higher Scope 3 emissions. So therefore, my argument is that for these firms, if they disclose, we say that if you truly want us to believe you're truly clean, give us everything. That is the key. Because don't mislead the public in terms of investment, right? So that is the argument. So you want to really prove yourself clean, show us everything, open kimono. Don't only show just half, show the whole thing, all right? So that is key. Then of course, academics, we have to run a lot of robustness checks. So we have different things. For example, there's one matching mechanism. Is for those disclosing firms, we try to match with comparable firms, all right? So this is what we find. All right, so this is what we learned. So let me conclude, then we'll open up for discussions. So basically, there are a lot of opportunities to discuss all these things. And basically, that my key message I want to share with you is that companies now, they're evolving. Then in terms of regulations, also evolving. But I think that it's also good to see how companies try to change the supply chain design, product design, circularity, in terms of how do they actually incorporate in terms of recycling, remanufacturing, and also products. And how do they actually change the way they operate. So I think the ultimate goal is not about investing money. The main reason why we invest in this company is we want them to do good. So to do good, we need to have good measurements, right? So therefore, Scope 1 is easier because within 4 walls, but I think that we need to push them further to actually disclose Scope 3. All right, hopefully in the future, we look at a pair of genes, we can actually see the entire picture, the point of origin, the entire ecosystem, and the emissions, such that we must push for supply chain transparencies and also the measurement Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. With that I will stop here and we open for discussions. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This is very insightful. You have done a lot more than what you have shown us on the webinar about a year ago, and it's something that I've been thinking myself. How to use input-output tables to estimate firms scope 1 to scope 3 emission, but I'm always slower than you. But congratulations for writing such an important paper. Let me ask a couple of first questions. Maybe the first one is going to be more about the paper, and the second one is more about policy or more macro things. Oh yeah, of course.
Sorry, I have to leave, but
Thank you.
sorry about that. Just I don't have time for that. No,
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. This is great work. I just have a technical question about
Yes.
supply chain, because if you look at a supply chain, right, Tesla is kind of right in the middle. Tesla have suppliers and consumers. So how do we actually count accurately for everybody? Because Tesla is in the middle. Sure, you need to disclose everything. You need to account for transportation, but where do you draw the line? There's always this life cycle analysis.
Absolutely.
Tesla gets supplier on the tires, the wheels, everything. Who get what percentage, right? And then for your transportation company, they have many customers. So how do they share the emissions?
Great questions. Yeah, thank you. Max is truly a brilliant researcher, and I have the privilege to work with him. I hope to continue working with him as well. So take Tesla, for example. So the focal firm is Tesla. So here, with the data about Tesla, so we cannot really have information about downstream because we have no information. We have to start from somewhere, just like ESG. We start with that, better than nothing. So start with Tesla, then we can work upstream. So that's why we use the input-output table. Now, for the data that they have, is we do not really capture who the suppliers are, because it's very nebulous. Because Tesla could have thousands of suppliers, tier 1, and then tens of thousands of tier 2. So therefore, that's how the input-output table comes into play. So we're not looking at the micro level of the particular suppliers. We're looking at the macro level in terms of industrial sector. So in order to generate a battery, then you need a lithium. You need some kind of materials. So we look at in terms of minerals, some of the minerals. Then in the case they have an input-output table, how much lithium need to be used to generate that much of revenue of batteries. So we do not know who the suppliers, because no one has. Sometimes the companies themselves do not have. So therefore, this is more the macro. Now, but I know that ideally we'd like to have the entire supply chain visibility. We don't have that. But in the absence of that, from the policy perspective, macro level, it is a reasonable measurement, because micro level will take decades, if impossible, and also keep on changing, right? So at macro level, each year the U.S. government they update the table worldwide using table. So they use the industrial sector. So in the case, this analysis is purely based on from Tesla upstream. So that's what we do. Hope answering the question. We're not there yet.
Let me ask my question first. Thank you, Max. So since Max already asked a technical question, I ask a more macro policy oriented. Everyone is talking about Scope 3 pretty much based on the argument that you made, right? Like firms are polluting not directly, and now they are trying to outsource. But we know a lot of emerging markets are still going through stages of industrialization, and we know on average industries are dirtier than services, like banks and whatever. So should we be concerned that this compliance with Scope 3 requirement that the European Union governments are promoting right now
That's right.
will essentially hurt the growth dividends for the emerging markets that may not have the technologies to upgrade, but at the same time still have to industrialize in order to grow?
That's a good question. Would that put the different country in a disadvantage because they don't have that kind of technology, right? That is absolutely right. So in that case, because if you let's say outsource to European countries, then in case they have all these rules and regulations, relatively cleaner, but it's much more expensive. Versus you source it from a different country is cheaper, but they use different technology. Now, but this one is already implicit capture in terms of different countries. They already, at an aggregate level, they implicit capture at the macro level, not on the micro level. But then, ideally, that would actually create a disadvantage to different countries. I fully agree. Technically speaking, they do have the input table, output table by countries. But the problem is that U.S. has the most comprehensive input-output table for different sectors. But in different countries, you can go to the website, it's fine. Some other countries have missing values. So until those countries that also provide a more complete data, then we can compare apples and oranges. Because right now, everything is based on the U.S. Table, based on the industry sectors, without knowing exactly which country they source from. So that's not just for that. You're absolutely right.
Thank you very much. I saw two hands first, so Brian.
Angela first, yeah.
And then Angela, and then Margie. Angela.
Actually, can I interject before Max leaves?
Max, you cannot leave.
Sorry. I want to go back on this point. We are at a very unique. We have the entire supply chain.
That's right.
Under our control. And my company starts from cotton ginning all the way to now we also have retail. We are trying to capture the carbon emission at each stage. And I think, since Professor Hao Li is chairing the sustainability, now I think it's useful if we can capture everything along get one data point rather than the average. I think that could be quite useful.
Oh, absolutely.
For every industry, we can get a few data points that are clear, because there's a lot of problem with that average. It's
absolutely.
And I think Chris fully knows that, but it's in lack of other data, then that's the best we can go. But I think it is so important to look at the variance. So
absolutely.
I think this is something that we really can take.
Yes.
Offline.
So this one is for the company perspective. Will be like I can seek support from Margie to track the single company, single firm. For single firm, we do that. But this is about public policy for the entire industry. So this is more on the micro versus macro level. So that's a key difference. Yes, as a benchmark, right?
Then you can really see what are the problems.
Max can leave.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, fascinating research. My question is, how costly is it for firms to also report Scope 3 emissions? If what I'm concerned about is the potential backlash if we impose this requirement that you not only need to disclose your Scope 1 emission, but also what your suppliers are doing and things like that, then because that make the reporting very costly.
Absolutely.
And then that might create a perverse incentive that firms actually were doing well, but because of concern about administrative costs or whatever, that they might not want to voluntarily disclose this. And also because once you input this requirement, it will put the firm on the spot. Because initially I disclosed this because I want to look good, but now you actually make me look bad because I'm outsourcing things upstairs, right? So I think we need to be very careful with the normative implication, how you want to design the rule, not to discourage.
Very good.
Yeah.
But Angela, now in terms of voluntary disclosure is not going to be an option. In Europe, they are pushing for mandatory, right? That's point number one. So would be like in Europe, as Hayway pointed out, in Europe is all pushing for this mandatory disclosure regulations. Secondly, SEC, they all have to propose that all firms, if you're publicly traded, you need to disclose your Scope 1 and Scope 3. Therefore, that's why a lot of the consulting firms and law firms, they are very happy. It creates a lot of business. So in the case, it's actually create jobs. So I think that is, I think right now the regulations, the movement is that this is no longer a voluntary disclosure, it will be mandatory. That is the key. So in that case, we'll put everyone on the same level playing field because you have no options.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I just want to go back to something you said just then about how you want to look at a bigger picture, sort of sectoral level implications as opposed to sort of what, you know, in your response to Margie
Single
just
firm,
then.
right.
Yeah, single firm questions. I actually think these two can be conjoined. I don't think, you know, it's possible to combine the two because consider the following, you know, if we look at the supply chain and we say there are one or two critical junctures or pressure valves of large firms where it is easy to track and easy to get the Scope 3 emissions due to corporate incentives and mandatory declarations and all of these other mechanisms in place, then by having a policy that mandates disclosure and enforcement in accordance with them, you can induce sectoral-wide effects by forcing these individual firms to be gatekeepers. So they effectively act in conjunction with the state and ensuring that the upstream and the downstream emission requirements are fulfilled and also aligned. And in fact, you can broaden this further to include S as well. So it's not just environment or carbon emissions, but also societal implications and adverse consequences on society at large. And how you quantify those is obviously not a question. But I was just wondering what you might make of that sort of possibility for marrying the two, you know, sectoral and private firms.
Margie gave me a lot of food for thought, because I think that if we have a particular detailed analysis of firm, then we show that how a firm can actually track the emissions along the supply chain, because she owns the entire supply chain. So that's why she has a complete visibility, but most firms do not have, right? So that could be served as a benchmark. And then I think that the governments need to work with business people before they just emptily, because they try to create regulations in a vacuum. It's very dangerous. So they need to work with the industry leaders to try to work what is the right measurements, right? That is another one. And also how to go about measuring it. Because right now, there is no consistent mechanisms to measure that. So I think that's why I think that if AGI can, maybe I'll be happy to join force. Yeah, so in that case, I think that would be a good starting point. Because I can tell you, there's a very few companies around the world has this kind of completely centralized supply chain. In the world, there are more companies they actually source from other countries. So in that case, it's a very rare. So in that case, Margie's firm is a unique opportunity. So that's why I think we need to do that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lewis. I'm from Pacific Founder, data intelligence-driven investment firm.
Excellent.
Thank you for such a marvelous approach. So, as the professor already left, we are the early stage investor for Tesla. So we still own the body shop of Tesla inside China.
Okay.
So we have also a biomass plant up north in China as well. So the funny thing is very technical. So my question is, as an investment holding firm, which usually we don't hold majority of the company, so we already engaged to start reporting ESG. So what kind of approach we can do it in order to consolidate the minority interest on our portfolio. Usually Tesla is listed company, right? So people will look at the listed company, but in terms of what I mentioned, body shop, because I think Tesla reporting or listed company actually omitted overlooking the repairing. You know, I look at that, we start investing in Tesla, so we in Northeast China, I think back in 2016, only 1,000 Tesla owner. Right now, it's like, wow, so many. So the pollution or the governance should be putting on the stage after they sell. So because Tesla have a very fixed price on all the parts.
That's right.
So actually all the pollution or the thing will come after. So that is not even Scopefree can look at it.
That's Scopefree Downstream. Okay. That data is not available right now.
Okay.
So I think that it's important to Max is we start with the firm, because these are the publicly traded companies. So we use as a focal firm. So using input-output data, we have upstream. Now, what your situation you describe is downstream in terms of after-sales services, right? That is very good, and also circularity, how to recycle and all this. That one's not captured, because I've spoken for some of the forum for General Motors. They have the same problems. So right now we are not there yet. So as I point out, this is in a flux. We're not there yet. I'm trying to encourage this movement. Hopefully that we have to fix the upstream first, then hopefully try to figure out how to do downstream. Because in terms of industrial sector, in terms of after-sales repair, that one is highly specialized. That would be more considered service sector. So unless there's more reliable data available, right now it's not there yet. So, but it's a matter of time. Yes. So right now there's no simple way to compute it.
Before I hand the mic to other audience, right now I have a very stupid way to do. I weighted the parts that we dispose in tons. So right now I have my auditors putting a note in my internal report because I can't evaluate the emission.
That's right.
So we weight those in tons. So, and I wouldn't want to scare you, it's horrifying. So I feel bad investing a body shop. I'd rather invest the Tesla shares. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful talk. So the question I have goes back more to the earlier part of your discussion about the ESG principles, and you shared a slide which had multiple components, and you were describing that this will evolve as well, and that there will be more clarity. So I've had some friends recently in conversations with various banks in China, and her reflection or response from those conversations was that there is this question whether ESG is globally representative, or is it somewhat skewed from a certain geographic orientation. To what extent do you think the current ESG measures are sort of predetermined by perhaps more of a Western orientation, or to what extent do you think there is scope for new insights or measurements or perspectives to be incorporated into the ESG?
Very good. Thank you. So I think right now, in terms of this kind of measurements, is kind of controlled or dictated by the financial reporting, because it started with that. So then accounting with FASB. So now with SASB, so sustainability in terms of reporting system. So that is started from the West, right? So then the question is, what if other people maybe wish to have different measurements? But right now it's really pushing by the European as well as the US. Europe is actually leading on the ESG movement, right? So that's why EU has the first mandatory reporting. But at the same time, now China is actually looking into this kind of ESG measurements as well. Ping On, the companies actually they collect a lot of data on ESG, so it's Ant Financials. So right now they are still trying to figure how to measure, just like this gentleman pointed out, how to do that, because it's not easy, right? So, but I think that is, I hope that now that there's also international body. So I hope that maybe they will try to make it more a diverse group, not just in terms of regulatory bodies, and will be more inclusive of different countries, and also including the finance and accounting, and also as well as industry leaders, to share what is the good measurements for the common good for the world. So I think this needs to be addressed. I fully agree with you. So I think in Europe right now it's country by country, but now they try to merge, because everyone's looking at different parts of the elephant. Then they decided now, I think that now they actually come up with the international body to actually look into different measurements. Hopefully they will come to agreements in terms of what kind of measurements would be more amenable to different countries. Because as Hei-Wei pointed out, maybe some of the measurements is a little bit unfair to developing countries, such as the technology, like water treatment, right? Very few companies will have the technology, like Margie's company can do the water treatment, and also in terms of renewable energy, because in a certain country it's not easy, it's very expensive, right? So in this case, it takes time. But I think right now they try to be more inclusive. I think it's called IFRS, International Financial Reporting System. Yes? Huh? Yes, International Financial Reporting Standard. Yes, yes. Because there's so many acronyms, I lost track. Because of my age, you cannot memorize everything. But thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. Maybe one more question. Oh, I see, well, two more hands. Maybe I take two more together.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate that. As you mentioned that for EU and US, they are demanding more Scope 3 emission. What are you seeing the trends in the policy space in, for example, Southeast Asia, in mandatory disclosure for the company in each jurisdiction? So just want to see the trend and also your view on the challenges or maybe opportunities in these countries. Or maybe the challenges would be whether it is really hard to have the accountability or implementation of those regulations, etc. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, right now, I think that I can tell you, like Walmart is mandatory. If you want to sell your products to Walmart, you need to comply with their ESG measures because you count towards the Scope 3, right? So they also do auditing as well. Then this reminds me of maybe in the 80s, the ISO certification. So Southeast Asia went through that period of time. That created a big boom of consulting firms, how to do the ISO 9000 certification. So I think that this is has resembled that kind of process. So initially, I think that is would be more Western firms dictate the measurements. Then Southeast Asia may need to comply. Otherwise, they can't do business with these Western firms. So for example, Unilever, they have announced they have a global living wage initiatives. So that means that every single division along the supply chain, you could be in Southeast Asia as a supplier, you need to pay your employees the living wages in that particular location. If you do not comply, they cannot do business with you. So that would be becoming a new movement. But I think that would create a lot of jobs for auditing firms. So someone needs to audit, and legal firms, and for compliance, right? So in that case, I think it will create a lot of consulting and legal services in Southeast Asia, how to actually comply with these international regulations.
Thank you. I have a question on banking because, as you know, banks are also an important actor in funding ESG activities. So from the supply chain angle, from your experience with banks in the US, for example, how do they actually allocate funds through trade finance specifically?
Okay. There are two different things. One is that in terms of the bank itself, right? So in that case, for the bank, normally they care about Scope 1 and Scope 2. Scope 2 in terms of energy that they consume, right? For the trade finance, we have the experts in the audience, Alex Yang, the co-author. So if we actually look at trade finance, that is in terms of the trading. So that one, I'm not familiar with that in terms of banks. So he would be the expert to answer the questions.
Joyce.
Our bank offers some products called sustainability-linked loan. And I think even maybe 1 or 2 decades ago, IMF has already linked sort of sustainability measures in their trade finance. So they collaborate with banks and say, Puma, for example, they examine their supplier. If their supplier satisfies certain sustainability requirement, then they get more favorable terms in terms of trade finance. So there have been some work there.
Great. I'm sure we can continue for another hour on this topic, but we started late and we ended 5 minutes late as well. I think it's a good time to stop here, and Chris may be able to stay behind for 5 more minutes to chat with some of you. But it's wonderful to have you here. To clarify some of our confusion about ESG, and this is obviously an evolving, ongoing topic, not only for research, but also for practitioners. Thank you, Chris. And next time, we're going to have you to come here to talk about China-US relation.
Yes, I promise.
We'll give you 3 hours on this.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.